Hello, everyone. My name is Rebecca, pronouns she, her, and I'm one of the co-directors of the Notebooks Collective. We founded in 2021. We are a virtual literary arts space focused on community, connection, and continued learning. Please check out our website at thenotebookscollective.com to see upcoming events and classes. The Notebooks Collective believes that Black Lives Matter and acknowledges that as a virtual organization, our offices are on the lands of the Kickapoo, Nipmuc, Agawam, Massachusetts, and Pawtucket tribes. Native peoples across the world continue to preserve and celebrate their cultures, and we encourage you to support Native artists and writers. As we do this land acknowledgement, we want to recognize those who are suffering from conquest and terror in this present moment in Gaza, Ukraine, Congo, and Sudan. Our thoughts are with them. And we know that these are stressful times, and we're glad that you could step into this room with us tonight to celebrate community. I will now welcome Lisa to introduce our presenters tonight.
Thank you, Becca. Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa. My pronouns are she, her, and I am one of the co-directors of the Notebooks Collective. We are so grateful that you've joined us tonight for this discussion. I'm not sure how many of you know this, but Becca and I met in grad school. We were in the same poetry cohort, though I graduated a little before she did. I tell you this because there's something singular about sharing a poetry cohort, something that is so terrifyingly intimate and challenging and comforting at the same time that it feels almost impossible to describe it to someone who hasn't shared the experience. Maybe that's why I felt an instant connection to Marcus and Rivka's story. They met in the MFA program at UMKC and have said that their different sensibilities about poetry, Rivka's more avant-garde and experimental, Marcus's more personal and introspective, have made them better poets. Together, they co-founded the exemplary journal Bear Review and continue to write and publish poetry true to their own voices. I could see, just from reading a few poems from each poet, how different their voices are, how different their experiences. To this reader, spending time with Marcus's poetry is like spending time with an inner voice that wants to break free. And spending time with Rivka's work is like entering another world, one that's different from mine, except for that indelibly human need to be seen as we are and to be loved for who we are. Left to two people who don't respect and care for one another the way that Rivka and Marcus respect and care for each other, these different voices might, at best, disregard one another, and at worst, bring out the worst in each other. So how lucky are we that we get a first row seat to this conversation tonight, to hear how two people with vastly different poetic sensibilities find beauty and value in each other's work and in each other as friends, co-founders of Bear Review, and continued peers. And now to their formal bios. Marcus Myers lives in Kansas City, Missouri, where he teaches and serves as co-founding and managing editor of Bear Review. Author of the chapbook Cloud Sanctum 2022, his poems have appeared in or are forthcoming from The Common, Contemporary Verse 2, The Florida Review, 14 Hills, The Los Angeles Review, Mid-American Review, Rhino, Salt Hill, Southeast Review, and elsewhere. Rivka Clifton is the author of Muzzle from Jackleg Press, as well as the chapbooks Mott and Agape from Osmanthus Press. She has work in Pleiades, Guernica, Black Warrior Review, Colorado Review, and other magazines. Please help me welcome Marcus and Rivka.
Thank you.
Yeah, what a lovely introduction, Lisa. Thank you so much.
I think you should probably just read the poems, read our poems, just like you do all the talking. We'll sit back.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind Lisa reading a few of our poems for sure. I don't know if Lisa's up for that, but yeah, that would be nice. Yeah, so Rivka, I was thinking earlier about our earliest poetry conversations, which I'm pretty sure took place on my porch. Do you remember? It was like probably was it 2013 or 2012?
Yeah, right in there.
Yeah. And I don't know, we were so almost like drunk on poetry. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
Yeah. And and then, Bear Review kind of came out of that. I don't want to make it sound like we were intoxicated entirely, but Bear Review kind of came out of that when you asked me if I'd want to form a literary magazine. And at first, I didn't think we had any right to form a literary magazine. I don't know. I had that kind of sense of like, well, who are we to form a lit mag? And um, you were pretty confident though, and I kind of thought of it in like this. I don't know, something kind of reverent came over me, and I thought, you know what, poems need us. Um, maybe that's a little narcissistic, but in that moment, I thought poems actually need us, and poets need us. Um, and so I don't know. I just kind of wanted to tell that story. Just a couple of fragments from memory. What do you remember about those days?
I think what I remember most is um like you seem like someone that had everything figured out. Like you knew what you wanted to do in poetry. You knew um
But
you
I
knew
didn't.
what, yeah, what you didn't want. You knew what you had to say. And I think I was really drawn to that. And I didn't know what I had to say. I just knew that I like words and
Yeah,
I like sentences and I like
yeah,
how you can manipulate them to like
yeah.
say things that surprised you.
And
And
that's what drew me to, if I can interject, that's what drew me to your poems. I mean, your poems were your drafts were always alive on the page, even if they were really rough. I mean, they had some energy, some fire. And yeah, they were phenomenal. Even what, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, when was that? 11 years? I don't even know. I can't.
we won't
2012,
have a time
12 years.
machine to go back and
Yeah.
look at those poems. So
Time
yeah,
work.
I'll
It's
take
already
that
in our, yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was just like I think I don't know. I think at that time I really needed someone who I felt so I think what I was about to say is that when we're thinking of bear review and what that might mean, what that might mean for us, I think Marcus, you were someone that whose aesthetics I really trusted and who was responsible and took poetry seriously. And I felt like that was a great those are great assets for an editor to have and someone that could like I don't know, I just felt like we could have really good ideas and you would be a good person to like help realize those ideas.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we did have pretty good ideas, if that isn't too self-serving for me to say. I thought we hit the ground running pretty well with Bear Review. And yeah, your ideas were so fresh and new. I mean, you're so much younger than me. What's our age difference? I just turned 50. If that's okay to
And
talk about, too personal.
yeah, no, and I'm
Okay.
35, so we're 15 years
Right.
apart.
So, no, I really admired your energy, and yeah, the fluidity of your ideas, as we were kind of thinking of ways to gain some traction with Bear Review. And you had very many great ideas. Yeah, so I completely trusted you, because I knew that your heart was in the right place, with poems, and like you agreed with me that poems needed us. My kind of mystical, almost like Eliot, notion that like, there's something deeper than just two people out of grad school. with the gall to think that the internet needed another literary magazine or poetry magazine. So yeah. So I mean, that's pretty much our story. I think Rivka's frozen again. Shoot. All right, I keep checking to see if you're frozen. Okay, yeah. So I'm going to ask you a question and ask you to follow up with a poem. Does that sound good, Rivka?
Yeah.
Okay. So thinking about your chapbook, Agape or Agape, and thinking about your forthcoming book, Muzzle. I've been noticing a lot of mouths in the poems, and so yeah, the reader finds the mouth as a metaphor at different scales. Usually, as in Agape's beast-headed, the mouth is more animal than person, or it's of the world more broadly before it's of the speaker's own mouth. Can you read this beast piece and talk with me about the mouth in it and how it's in communication with other mouths in the book and maybe in Muzzle? I'm curious to know if you contain multitudes of mouths, LOL.
Oh, that's a good question. Do you want me to read it first and then we can talk about?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Yeah, so we can refer back to it.
Okay, so let me just scroll through. So beast-headed. Since labyrinths cannot be made more difficult, they must be made larger. I drag my hand across the wall of his torso's taut musculature. Tell me who is more gone, I ask, the star or the space around it. We are watching 747s vulture the airport and listening to glacial electronic soundscapes. Our mouths gape while the wings-lit tips furrow circles into the night. The world is a tongue licking our outer ears. The soft rasp of cars on the highway slough their skins into our inner labyrinths. The plane's corkscrew back to Earth. I think about Daedalus, famous for killing his own son. Tell me I am burning, I say. You are burning, he says, and my mouth fills with skin. Like Icarus, I am famous for going down, for falling. Before airplanes, birds, how easy a labyrinth must appear to them. They follow the jet stream's thread like liquid draining from the prick of a needle. Before labyrinths, our own bodies twisted around each other. I grab his hips and tug him into me. He says some skin was meant to be stretched to its breaking point, quickly open like a diaphragm of a camera, begging the night to fill it with warmth. My throat is an easy labyrinth. He grunts and is gone before he arrives.
My throat is an easy labyrinth. And before that, the tongue is licking the world. Is that right? Or city?
Yeah.
Talk to us about mouths that like kind of I don't know, there's almost like this mouths are kind of like what Timothy Morton calls a hyper object, this kind of big thing that's bigger than all of us and also of us, and we can't escape it. I don't know. That's what I'm getting from the mouths, but you probably weren't thinking anything along those lines.
I think, okay, so I'm going to give this in a really roundabout way. So when I do my PhD thing, studies in Texas, one of my really good friends, who's also a fantastic poet, Minador Mashra, pulled me aside and was like, asked me the same question, like, you always have mouths in your poem, what's going on there? So that like became a whole joke, like, let's make this poem a Rivka poem. Oh, and with a mouth. Have a mouth in there. Have someone throwing up another mouth. And it just became like a kind of funny thing. And when I was going through Muzzle to kind of like prep it to send out again, to the contests and open reading periods, I wanted to like kind of play with that and make fun of it, because it's always good to make yourself in poetry. So I'm looking at, there's a poem in Muzzle called Looking for Someone Who's Not Around, that ends with, I spat into my hand and swirled ink into a mouth, always a mouth when I'm done with it. And just kind of like, I guess, referencing that. As far as like what it brings me, I don't know. It's I feel like mouths are like these weird paradoxes where if we're speaking, something's coming out, but we have to breathe for things to come in. So this like this sort of like part of your body that's interior and exterior at the same time. And I don't know.
The mouth of a cave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It extends out and it kind of like goes into you. And I don't think I get too philosophical about mouths or anything. They're just kind of fun.
Deep. Not as deep as I wanted to be.
Yeah, I'm gonna be very disappointing in that regard. I guess
No.
in terms of your poetry, do you see any like repeated images or like kind of pet projects that go beyond the scope of a single manuscript?
Yeah. I love the idea of, I guess, for lack of a better phrase or word, intertextuality. I mean, I like the idea of texts being within texts. And, as we know, like texts can be any kind of language or like an, system of signs, that kind of thing. And I love the idea of like a poem being in a file, which is in, your computer, and then maybe a cloud, and like the language of all of that, like how one thing is nested into another, keeps showing up in my poems. It's probably just a tick. And yeah, maybe it's for me as well. It's maybe not that deep. It's just what I just said it is. I like the idea of one thing and another. And I think poetry does that so well. And, it gets at kind of Keats's like, what is it, negative capability or something like that, where, the poet is to kind of occupy the thing, right? And maybe one thing occupies this other thing. Negative capability, is that what it is? Something like that. It's been so long since I read that letter. Keats wrote a letter to his brother, and he explained this, and there were like pull cues involved and things like that, pull balls involved, and side pockets and things like that. I could read a poem that has that in it, or maybe a section of the poem. It's a long poem. I guess it's in Our Love is a Delicate Material in a Cornell Box, As Vast as the Sea, that first book in my first poem in my chapbook.
Yeah, that's what I was asking you to read, actually.
Okay. Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, well, that works. Okay. So yeah, this is from my chapbook, Cloud Sanctum. And this is the first poem. Our love is a delicate material in a Cornell box as vast as the sea. I will keep these missives and photos in a cloud, an idea folded in to amuse you. Our words and pictures and no object we will ever touch, our ideas adrift in an amorphous cachet of our data. We might wish our blood and air supply were not already locked in the open systems of our bodies, just so we might lodge our organs in servers forever. Regarding missive and cloud, I will only use these wispy nouns to watch the candela shift from serious to whimsy in your eyes, to see the bluest sun in your pupils hammer the sea-like body of what I imagine as gold leaf, what I imagine as the oceanic material unconditional love is made of, which I keep for you beneath my ribs, always, where we house every beat in a Cornell box with screaming lobsters wearing pinch the cook aprons, where they dance and boil within those slow seconds of my dad jokes, in which you roll your eyes away from my ridiculous words and toward the actual clouds. Yeah, so this idea that, I don't know, maybe it's is I was raised Christian, and so maybe it's like this idea that, in every body is a soul. And like, I don't know. I don't know what else to say about it because I'm not Christian anymore. And yeah.
Well, I think there's like kind of a paradox in that the idea of like the soul, body, physical, metaphysical, digital, and I don't know what to call it, maybe actual, but
Yeah.
I think I come back to we might wish our blood and air supply were not already locked in the open systems of our bodies, just so we might lodge our organs in servers forever. And I think, I don't know, there's like this, when I read your poems, there's always like a push and pull between temporality and like understanding that like an experience is ephemeral, and like the drive to like memorialize it or to like
Yeah. Yeah, memorialization, definitely. I was thinking just a moment ago that that was one of my first impulses for writing poems when I was like a teenager. I think I was 13. Was to leave something, to have something that I could leave in a box someday to my relatives, right? I was kind of a morbid kid, quiet, morbid kid. Yeah, so I mean, I think that's always there, and yeah, I'm so fascinated by funeral rites and things like that, and ancient, funeral rites and ancient culture. I taught sixth grade world history for a while, and uh, you know, I taught this to gifted kids, and they were really fascinated when we went, did the Egypt unit and the Mesopotamia unit with those kind of burial rituals and like um, the mummification process and things like that. And I got into it too, to be honest. I thought it was kind of interesting, and to kind of talk with these children about how every culture has a way to honor the dead, a way to remember them, and preservation is part of that. So yeah, it's always been kind of fascinating to me.
Yeah, and it's also like, I don't know, the dead have it easy because they're not going to change, but we as living people do change. So like, I don't know, I was like, we talked a little bit this weekend, and I was like just flipping through your chapbook, and I saw that it came out in 2022, and I remember us like exchanging this manuscript, like 2019, 2018, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when you go back to Cloud Sanctum, maybe like how do these poems feel to you? Do they feel like they're from a different person? Do they feel still true to Marcus Myers?
Yeah, they do right now, but I can see, 3, 4, 5 years down the road how they might feel like they're to a different person. For one thing, my kid is non-binary now, and this happened right after, probably 6 months after the chapbook came out. So if this is part of a larger collection, I will take out the daughter stuff probably, out of respect for them. but I don't know. I've talked to Audrey about it, and they say, well, that was from before. That was from when I was, I would call myself your daughter, and I was she her. So um, yeah. So I don't know, and I don't know if that's a good answer to your question, but yeah, I mean, I think poems. I've heard this somewhere before. Poems, as artifacts, have sort of a shelf life, and so um, I don't know that, but the shelf life has nothing to do with me anymore. Me, Marcus, the person. The shelf life has to do with this is like a cultural artifact. If it is one, that's a little grandiose of me to think that this little chapbook is a cultural artifact. But I mean, it'll line terrariums. It'll be recycled or thrown away. So yeah. Anyway. What about you? Like, do you feel that's a great question? And do you feel like since you wrote Agape, what was that, 2019, or Agape, Agape or Agape? What do you say?
Um,
Both.
I'm not gonna say it's
Okay. Gonna leave us like you're gonna leave us teetering on that homophone. Okay.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, but that was 2019. Do you feel like you've moved away from these poems, or are you still in that space and that sort of like image delivery system of like mouths and cities and parasites and things like that? All that really great abject stuff that you put in your poems.
So yeah, that chapbook, um, that I wrote all these poems like in 2015, 2016 that were um from the point of view of a trans woman who lived in my apartment and had my job and was concerned with the things that I was concerned about. But
Yeah.
they were just persona poems. So um there was nothing to really look too hard at with them. That's like obviously a lie. And like I don't know. It's I go back to that manuscript a bit, and like there are parts of me that I feel really sad for the person who was writing those poems,
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
so like locked out of herself.
Yeah.
But also I feel a lot of joy. I think um those poems, I think poetry in general, like gave me a lot of space to explore gender and identity in a way that was safe and possible for me.
Yeah.
When I first started transitioning, I actually reached out to our our MFA professor, Hadara Barnadab,
Mhm.
because she had a poetry prompt in one of our classes that was like, write a poem from the perspective of a different gender. And I remember just like really liking that prompt for some reason.
I remember this. Yeah, I remember you talking about that. Or I remember seeing the poem and you talking about how I don't know if you used the word liberating. I'm probably making that up, but you really liked that process. Yeah. So,
I did, and I don't. It was just. I think poetry, especially so-called persona poems, can really help figure out things for people. At least they did for me. Um, and I don't know. I'm grateful for poems for being there and allowing this like
uh,
theoretical space for us to like kind of inhabit.
yeah. Yeah, I've thought before, I don't know, like obviously a persona poem is different than a personal poem, but you know, the way that a person represents themselves on the page requires them to kind of put on this sort of, I don't know, front stage self, or this self that even if like from the interior or backstage or off stage or whatever, is still like a performance of that self. And so in that sense, so many of our poems, or my poems, I can only speak for me, um I don't know, maybe risk inauthenticity as it, strives for authenticity, if that makes any sense. Um, and I don't know, like I don't know. I think my best poems um, deny me that, like that reaching for authenticity. Knowing that it's impossible to be this authentic self. I mean, that's just as much a kind of bad faith move as um, lying. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because we can never be these fully formed objects. We're always, bound by time and entropy and things like that. And um, yeah, the best poems, my best poems, I think, are very much aware of that. And I don't know. I'm kind of spinning us in circles now, but
No, I,
yeah.
I like where this is going, and yeah, I like this idea of like performing a sense of self on the page rather than being a self. Um, could I ask you to read a poem that I see doing that?
Okay.
Um, could you read To Take Them from the Air?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm eager to hear what you think about that in the context of the performative self, for sure. To take them from the air. Dear daughter, nothing weighs as much as a thing meant for the air falling to the earth. Take the small flock of blue-winged teal wheeling through the flooded timber of a childhood memory. Watch how the long arm of my shotgun blast clutches and crumples their little bodies and tumbles them wing over wing into the water. How lovely it was to watch them fly, though lovelier to take them from the air. Now take the sleek tubes of the space shuttle's boosters as they lose their struggle with the thinning atmosphere shown that day on the television, rolled into Mrs. Hardister's sixth grade classroom, pieces of the craft falling away into cottony parabolas, gorgeous arcs pulled back into the grave context of disintegration and tragedy as interpreted to us by adults. Take finally, nearly 2 decades later, my own classroom full of seventh graders, marveling over the first tower's collapse within its column of ash, when one boy finds the strange joy in watching a thing fall from the air to the earth, exclaiming with a belly full of awe, "Wow, that just happened." And another boy shakes his head, smiles, and says, "Dude, people just died in there."
So I think what I like about this poem and what kind of I see connecting to this idea of like a performance of oneself is like how it moves between who the speaker is in the first stanza. It's at a different time than the second stanza than the third.
Mhm.
And they're all linked in this idea of like greater and greater tragedies and traumas. And I think that was a
Yeah.
really interesting concept in an interesting way to dramatize like the multiple selves that can be in the self.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thanks for that reading. A reading of the poem. I hadn't really pulled the thread through like that, like, from self to self in the poem. Yeah, so that I like that reading a lot. Um,
I also
yeah,
remember.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I also remember this being like one of the first poems that we discussed together.
Yeah, it's an old poem. This is the oldest poem in the chapbook. Yeah. I wrote it, I think, in 2007. So that's so long ago, right? And so at the time, the speaker's saying 2 decades later. And so 9/11 was only a couple of decades earlier. Now it's quite a while ago, I guess, right? So no, I'm
Something.
sorry. I'm kind of in a time warp these days with a baby at home. Yeah. So anyway.
Okay, so I this is something I'm always interested in with other writers. How is balance, because like, okay, you've read Muzzle, you know that there's like this obsession with like parenting and like other people's children. Um
Yeah.
how is the actual experience of being a writing parent?
What's it like?
Yeah.
It's weird. I'm drafting much more than I ever have, and I think it's because I've started writing on my phone, and I can hold Milo and draft on my phone with one hand. And as he's falling asleep, or as he's a toddler, and so as he's playing with something, um, in those blessed moments of independent play, I can quickly draft a poem. So my poems they're not as long as they used to be, usually. And they're a lot more like shorter lines, and concision is holy. It's always been holy, but it's holier than ever right now. So yeah. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's actually going pretty well. It's hard to make time to do a lot of reading. I could read a lot more, before a toddler. And when Milo was a little baby, I could still read pretty much hours a day because Milo would sleep and I would hold Milo and read. My wife Jana is a kind of a night owl and I'm a morning person, so it works out that I'm up with Milo and while she sleeps and gets some rest. Yeah, but I mean, I'm realizing that this process of putting together a poem has always really been a pretty scrappy process. Like you're just kind of like piecing things together from memory and from your environment, from other texts, for me anyway. And I can do it fairly well, even if if my environment's kind of hectic. Um, does that answer your question?
I think so. And it kind of leads me to something else I want to ask you. Because you mentioned like drafting poems on your phone, and something
Mhm.
that you that I really appreciate is you'll post drafts in your stories of poems and kind of show like new work, kind of show like how that work is changing. So it's
Yeah.
like really fun to go on these like little mini editing journeys with you. Um,
It's a compulsion. It really is. But I get a lot out of it because I imagine like in this, I post them to stories and I can see who's seen the poem drafts. And I'm like, oh, Lisa's seen it, Rivka's seen it, Sean's seen it, things like that. And I'm like, oh, I better change this. 'Cause it's almost like I'm seeing it from your eyes, from your
yeah,
perspective. And it's definitely compulsion for me to post those drafts. I know it's kind of verboten, um, but I rationalize it as I'm a great rationalizer, and I rationalize it as well. Like photographers post their shitty photos. Not that they're shitty; they're beautiful. But I mean, like the photos that don't make it into their $120 books and things like that. So why can't poets post their shitty first drafts? So
right.
yeah.
And in that vein, would you read some new work that you've
Yeah,
been?
I've got a poem I'm really excited about. Oh, I will read that poem that I'm excited about, and I have posted this to Instagram. Um, it's this really long, skinny poem that doesn't have any punctuation, and it's um, I don't know. I think it works. It reads pretty well though, and this is probably the fourth or fifth draft of this. Um, my poems are always pretty rough at first, and they change quite a bit before I send them out, of course. All right, so I've got just a little bit of gloss on this one, and that's that. Uh, since my divorce in 2013, well, more like around 2014, I've been really into backpacking. I know it's kind of a cliche to be in the backpacking after divorce. And so this poem is kind of poking fun of that. But I do have like a chapbook manuscript of backpacking poems, which um, were really fun to write on the trail. I would have my voice recorder and record them, or I'd have my notebook and, sitting around at a primitive like backcountry campsite in the Ozarks, just like getting some lines down. Anyway, okay, this one, speaking of the Ozarks, this one takes place in the Ponca Wilderness area in Arkansas, kind of north central Arkansas along the Buffalo River. It's this completely, um, it's a completely isolated place, but it was also a community a long time ago. Okay, here we go. The Ponca Wilderness area. Sorry, Ponca Wilderness in bad faith. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Nothing new under sun and water falling from this bluff at Hemden Hollow, 209 feet to the plunge pool below. They had already lowered the rope tied to a bucket of river stones last century, the increments denoted with red tassels, measuring feet, I read in one guide or narrative or another. I can picture it just over there where the couple sit and lean back on the slab and smile and squint to see the stream and breath of golden vapor behind themselves lock the particles of these moments in their screens. Last century, early in, photographers packed in tripods, etc., painters their gear. I came here from our city from 2016 and brittle I came here from our city 2016 from our brittle century, outfitted in anger and fear and the arrogance of new ultralight equipment, quick dry western shirt and convertible pants shorts, a kind of fast fashion for those bent on fast solitude, what some call a weekend of self-work, call the beauty of Mother Nature and decent credit. And I will have returned with many gorgeous pics and videos for my stream. No, the eye is not satisfied until the ear hears the mouths of followers working the candy shell from the core, of which I wanted more than anything, except to climb, then catch my breath, laced with the flash and thunder of dogwood and deer on the downhill switchbacks, and keep the palpable tonnage of this box canyon rolled and compressed in a side pocket.
That's so good. That's like,
Thank you.
I love how you can like go between those registers where things are like super serious and super deep, and then really, really silly and very self-aware.
Yeah, that's my
Such-
consciousness. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm so self-conscious. Yeah, always have been. So yeah, I love to put that in my poems too, because I don't know, I think a really good personal poem um, makes the self kind of I don't know, culpable, or um, I don't know. I like to show that like my speakers aren't always like great people, because I don't know, maybe that's me pushing back against my parents insisting that I be the good boy when I was a little kid. Nobody's fully good or bad, right? There are no heroes or villains. I mean, well, maybe there are, but most of us are neither heroic nor evil, right? I don't know. I like to get some of that like to get some kind of moral ambiguity into the poems, but not in any nefarious way. It's kind of like in Take Them from the Air, when the speaker admits that it was lovelier to watch the ducks fall after shooting them as a kid. I don't really think that, but I want to make space for that in a poem. And so that kind of self-consciousness, I guess, I really like to get into a poem. I like that kind of, I like the honesty of that. You know, even if it's not fully like me speaking in that moment, I like to, I don't know, I like to make space for that.
Definitely.
Let me ask you a question. So let's, if it's okay, let's pivot a little bit toward craft, like modes and forms of poems. The one thing I wanted to ask you about is that I remember this was probably, you were still in Kansas City, so this must have been 2015 or 2016. I remember when you wrote this really spare, short lines kind of poem, and they were wonderful poems. They kind of capitalized on tensions created by juxtapositions. You know, a sentence broke into really short lines. It was kind of a quick image delivery system, so it was all about the line rather than the sentence. Um, but you know, like most short line poems um, and medium length line poems, um, the meaning could kind of shift really quickly from line to line. Like, so you would have like a half meaning on this one line, and then suddenly there's this kind of reversal. And I know this isn't particular to any poems that you wrote, but I strongly remember this. And so I recall like tercets and couplets and some pieces with like mixed stanzas. I remember really short line sestinas riffing on pop songs from your youth, maybe, or from
Yeah.
your young adulthood. And then afterward, it seems like you moved toward a longer line and sort of prosody, in which the sentences became more muscular and rhetorical in their patterning. And so I don't know, it seemed like you were able to fit in more ideas and description. Talk to us about that. Like where has your, how has your sense of the line and stanza and I don't know, line length, how has that maybe not changed, but I don't know, what's that looking like for you these days?
Um, that's a doozy of a question.
Yeah,
I think. Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, maybe it's something that I've noticed and you haven't thought much about, but
I think to get to today, we'll have to backtrack and go back to Dallas, unfortunately. So I think so I think one of the things that anyone who's been in like a writing program of any kind knows there are always going to be people that are just like, I need more explanation this poem that I read 5 minutes before class, and want
yeah,
you to like hammer out everything for me. And I think my time in the PhD program, like I had at UNT, I already knew that this was going to be an experience that I had from going to UMKC, from like, I don't know, just being in communion with writers, that like people were gonna want explanations for things, and
okay,
that was going to be the audience that I was writing.
okay,
So I think part of my approach to both poetry and prose came from like understanding how can I have ideas, or how can I have rhetoric within a poem. And I was very lucky to have Bruce Bond as a mentor there. He helped me not be so afraid of thought and writing. But for thought to happen, it takes time. It takes words. And with my dissertation manuscript, Wrong Feast, I kind of wanted to like lean into that and make the lines as long as possible, make really long poems, and do all that stuff. So that's where I kind of went. Recently though, and I like am having a hard time carving out like time for all that detailed thought. So my lines are getting shorter again. So I think it's just like one of those things. It's just where you are, who you're writing to, who you're around, and what subjects are calling to you.
Yeah. Makes me think of William Carlos Williams like tapping out poems in between patients. That's the myth of William Carlos Williams. So maybe his lines were short when he was doing that. I don't know, or his poems were really small. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I feel like I keep wanting things to be deeper than they are, and so maybe it's time to turn to some questions that are less like philosophical. Yeah. So talk to us about your reading. Has your reading changed since you've transitioned? Like, are you like you've gotten rid of this? No, I don't mean to be crude, but you've gotten rid of this thing that you said you don't need anymore, right? Have you gotten rid of other things in terms of like your aesthetic? Like have you just been like, no, I don't need to read that kind of poet anymore. I don't need to read that kind of poem since you've transitioned.
Okay, so here's a really funny story. This is actually like I don't know, we all kind of grow up in like a misogynist sort of society. And I remember having this huge crisis because when I first started hormone replacement therapy, that like it was gonna change what I went to poetry for. I didn't know why I was thinking of that, but I was worried.
Yeah, that's a legitimate fear, I guess, I mean, yeah.
Here's the secret. It didn't. Um,
Yeah.
interest and aesthetics kind of transcend gender and gender identity.
Okay, I was curious about that for sure. Yeah.
But
Thanks for sharing that for sure.
Oh, no problem. I will say that I do cry a lot more when I read poems, which is weird. Didn't really happen. I think towards the beginning, like within the first 6 months of starting HRT, I was like rereading some Paul Celan, and I would just cry. Like, yeah.
It's a good thing, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I also find it more important for me to seek out other trans writers and to read them. So I think the question within your question was like, what is next on my poetry stack?
Yeah. What are you going to read next for sure?
So I'm doing a sort of like a poetry writing group with Veronica and my friend Austin. Veronica's at this event, so hi.
All right. Yeah.
So we're one of the books that we have that we'll be reading together is Greyhound by Aon Ginsberg from Noemi Press, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that book, and that's next on my list to read. What about you, Marcus? What are you reading? You said you don't have a lot of time to read these days.
Yeah, so I just finished a really good book by Julia Anna Morrison, a poet who's writing up and poet and filmmaker who's writing up in Iowa City. We've published her in Bear Review. She's excellent. I can't believe I'm not remembering the title right now. I don't have it in front of me, do I? No. Sorry, Julia, if you see this. My memory is just garbage these days. So just read that, and next in the stack is this book called The Familiar by Sarah Kane Katowski, friend of mine, and I'm interested in the project because Sarah kind of narrates what her extraordinary self and her ordinary self does, and they're at odds throughout, apparently. And I've read a few of the poems, and they're really good. So yeah, that's what I'm up to next. Then I'm hoping to read a book by a poet I've just discovered who lives down in New Orleans, Carolyn Hembry, For Today. She read at our AWP offsite, and I mean, this is on a different level, like a different plane than I'm on. This is like Rilke or something. I'm just really excited to read Hembry as well. I've heard such good things from people who have read her. So she has 2 books, and one of our editors at Bear Review right now, Nikki Ummel, knows her pretty well and considers Hembry is her mentor, and Nikki is really impressed by how much integrity Hembry has in putting a collection together. And Hembry has 2 collections now, and each one, Nikki says, has taken about 10 years. And I don't know, that's about the pace of my writing most of the time. And so maybe like selfishly, I'm like, okay, so it's worth it to not go too fast and try to really polish your poems and make sure that they're working together in a collection. So
I think that's a good pace. That's the same pace as Bridget Pegan Kelly.
okay.
Right before she passed. She had a book in, I think it was 84, 94, and 2004.
Okay.
So like
yeah. There's something really cool about that, especially in today's fast-paced, noisy, congested world, right? To kind of slow down and lean into, I guess, integrity, right?
So I'm here because we have some questions, and we want to make sure that we get to them before our time together ends. So I'm going to start with Cheryl's question. Cheryl says, I find form helps me when an emotional or difficult subject matter feels too large or big. Form helps me bring it closer to me and what I'm trying to express. Do you have a form that you like to work with?
Rivka, why don't you start us off answering that question?
Yeah, so I kind of had a love affair with the Sistina for like a good few years. I wrote like 50 or 100 of them, and that was fun until it wasn't. So yeah, other than that, right now I'm kind of I like keep going back to the sonnet just because it's like kind of like the I guess I'm like I'm writing all these poems about kind of falling in love with myself for the first time in my life. And I thought like, using the sonnet form would be like a kind of funny way to get at that. Right. Yeah.
A funny way to get at that. Obsessively myself.
Weird to like, I don't know, you start going into poetry with this idea that I want to escape my physical body, and then kind of like coming back to it as like a way to like celebrate who I am and kind of like how I see myself now.
Yeah.
And I don't know, with the sonnet, I like fucking it up. So I would combine Shakespearean and Petrarchan sonnets to kind of make a trans sonnet.
Yeah.
Can I read one? Is that okay? Can I do that?
Yeah, I think that'd be fine.
Okay. This one's called yeah. This one's called Daedalus at the Overlook. If a corridor in a labyrinth collapses, it makes a dead end. The howling synths burrow into my head like a surgeon, his tiny chisel, his titanium plates. The sinus is an air cavity, he tells me. I plan to crush it. There are days I am dead. My dug up skull like a clock in my mind, held by a Hamlet or doctor or egg. Once I said, trust to a man who shot me full of sedatives.
Mm. That's incredible.
Thanks.
Yeah, do you to the back to the question, circling back to the question, do you find form to be a solace?
Maybe not a solace as much. Oh yeah, actually, yeah, it's a solace to like the fear and anxiety of a blank page.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
You know, there's 14 lines, so you can just put little brackets.
There's something really satisfying about those 14, right? Yeah. Yeah, I don't really have a form, to be honest. There was a time when I wrote some sestinas, but not 100 of them. You know, I probably wrote 12 of them over the course of a couple of years, and I wasn't happy with them. I wasn't great at writing in that form, and in grad school, I struggled with form. You probably remember me writing this. I tried to write a crown of sonnets, and they didn't work, and so they had to become their own poems. I had to break out of the form and expand on a few of them and cut some of them. And so I'm kind of, I would love to find a form. About a week ago, I came across like my own form. You had asked what a karst system is, remember? Or you were joking around like WTF is a karst. And so I wrote the sequence of poems that had these kind of like repeated lines. Every poem had these repeated lines. And so the repeated lines were kind of mimicking the echo that you might hear in a cave or a cave system. And they're really, really great, strange poems. But that form that I kind of found, or the form that found me, is kind of interesting how it happened semi-consciously almost. Was really, really satisfying to write. And I wrote so many of these. I just got in this kind of obsessive, almost like this groove, like a chant or something like that. And so I can see the appeal to forms, definitely.
Awesome. So far we have 2 other questions. I'm telling you that so that we can kind of gauge our time. And I'm not sure if you each wanted to read a poem to end. You don't have to, but if you do, we want to leave time for that too. So
Okay.
I'm going to go to Lisa Sullivan asked a question. She wants to know if you can tell us about the dynamics of how you deal with accepting submissions, giving that. So Rivka, you're not with Bear Review anymore, right? So this is probably a question for how you did things before.
Yeah.
So when you were doing that together, how did you deal with accepting submissions, given that your writing is so different from each other? Did you accept poems individually? Did you only accept poems you both agree on? How did that work since you were since you were so different?
We would fight. We would like physically fight. Whoever won that
Yeah,
got
we
to.
did get into some heated arguments. I remember a few. Yeah. Yeah. But for the most part, we agreed. Sometimes it was Rivka being like, okay, he really feels strongly about this piece. Yeah, sure. Or vice versa, very quietly. We never spoke about that, but I think that was what was going on some of the time when we disagreed mildly. It was just two of us at first, and so it was pretty difficult to break a tie, or to break split the difference. But we did pretty well with it. Do you have anything other than that? Like, that's all I can think of right now.
Yeah, and I think probably like as far as like writers, we have very different aesthetics, but
Mhm.
I think something that we both learned in the editing process and in our own like reading lives is like, just because a poem doesn't, I guess, make us feel the transcendentalisms that you know that we're supposed to feel from poetry at a given time, it doesn't make it like a bad poem. It's just like, if someone, like, I don't know, it's all about like having like kind of setting aside what you want to read in a moment for what like someone else may want to read. At least
Yeah.
that's how I would approach it. And I think like it's kind of like thinking about, I don't know, I
Yeah.
don't know where I'm going with this, but I will
No,
say that Marcus is a
I know.
really good reader of poems and a very generous one, and I try to be that.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. You were really generous with your reads as well. Um, yeah, I like this idea of like maybe stepping outside of your preferences a little bit to think about what our readers would enjoy reading, or would this poem play well with the other poems? How is this a kind of poem that we need because it kind of um, expands on this theme that we see running through the poems that we're accepting. And every issue has a kind of through line in terms of theme. And I'm no longer making decisions about poems. We have a team of poetry editors. I'm the managing editor, but they're still talking about, as they order the issue, how cool it is that um, a certain theme just kind of emerges. And it does. And who knows what that's about. Maybe we're all sort of like a school of fish, just kind of moving in one direction and then another. And our poems are so similar, and we see that reading through submissions. We come across so many similar kinds of projects in a given, month or year. So
That's a great image of the school of fish, and they just keep falling.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's kind of how I see us as poets, working within um, overlapping communities, all over the states for sure. And yeah.
Krista has a really interesting question, I think, which is, do either of you have unspoken rules that you have when editing other poets' work that you either wittingly or unwittingly break when writing your own poems?
Will you say that question?
Yep. Do either of you have unspoken rules that you have when editing other poets' work that you either wittingly or unwittingly break when writing your own poems?
So to me, that question is about preference. Is that correct? Like preferences that we might have, rules for ourselves that we might have. Like I will never use the word soul in a poem or something like that, or love, or I don't know. Is that correct? Let's see.
I took it to mean like, Krista, do you want to unmute and see if you can clarify?
Sorry, Krista.
Hi.
Hey, Krista. Krista
good to see
Siglin. Oh my gosh. Hey.
Yeah, somewhat about preferences. I ask also as someone who has like been a poetry editor and have definitely had like aversions to poems doing certain things, and then I'll turn around and write a poem that does the exact same thing, and I'm like, why is it different here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Rivka, do you have that experience?
No. I have more, I guess, I was very sad in the MFA program, and I was very, for a lot of fair review, I was very sad. So I think a lot of, while that was like not a fun time, I think it kind of helped me when I was reading and editing other people's work to kind of think about what the poem was doing rather than what I wanted the poem to do. And when I like write or edit my own work, I have an idea of like I like can't escape what I want to do rather than what the poem wants to do. So it's like, I don't know, it's kind of yeah. That was not a good answer.
No. I'm following what you're saying, Rivka. I guess for me, Krista, I can't remember very many times when that's happened, except that fairly recently, probably within the last 6 months, I've started noticing this trend of poets breaking lines on of and to and for, like prepositions. And I was brought up in the like late 90s, early 2000s. That's when I had my first workshops, not to do that, and to break on a strong word or something like that. And so I initially had this aversion to doing that, but then I found myself doing it, like, because I love to have like stagger a long line and like a short line, and sometimes like those long lines, like I don't know, it's just maybe it's just aesthetically pleasing to me, and kind of this messy, messy way, or for a messy reason, to break the line there. I don't have a good reason for doing it, and I doubt that the poets are publishing their poems with on preposition with lines broken on prepositions have a very good reason either. Maybe they do, but I don't know.
That's awesome. Do you want to each read a final poem, maybe?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Who read last, Rivka?
Rivka read last.
Well,
Okay.
I read a little.
Okay. Yeah. Let me find one. Yeah, so I'll read one. I'll read one called Red-Tailed Hawk, and just a bit of gloss on this one. Yeah, this was after my divorce, and I think I had read a Galway Kinnell poem in which he becomes like a bear or something like that, and it's like he not only becomes the bear, but he enters the body of a bear. It's pretty visceral and it's pretty gruesome. And so this has some kind of visceral imagery as well, metaphors and stuff. Okay, Red-Tailed Hawk. After our family was torn apart, I lived in a vector of death, with nobody to share the shadow I needed. A red-tailed hawk like never before, I needed to be seen from far, to see myself from beyond the visible spectrum, in keen binoculars whose yellow could look long and deep into my dying heat, Before it cooled, I needed to wear her, the wide wings, the copper tail, the capped head and beak. I wanted her talons, her monotony of field and fence post. I wanted what felt the most real, the holding the pelt of the dying animal, not too long, the refusing anymore, ever again, to be the torn apart and dying one. I craved to feel her swallowing small bodies, whole and grinding them into particles before untangling feathers and leaving land for air again. To fly as savage and graceful angel, rise above, to see the way forward, to see the larger heat, even at a great distance, to clutch the cold moments of this life, to swallow and gain a vitality from it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that sucks to follow up.
Sorry. No, you've got a whole quiver of poems as good as that, I'm sure. So shoot your best one out here.
So I guess I'll end with what is the first poem from Muzzle, and also probably the most recent poem that I've written, I think. And it came about because I was working with Jen Harris and Richard Seiken. Does this goes on YouTube right afterwards?
It'll
No answer.
not immediately, but it'll go on YouTube.
Okay, so I'll refer. I'll stay formal. Yeah, and it was Richard and I were going back and forth about what poem should start the manuscript, and he had his ideas, I had my ideas, and they didn't match up. So what I guess that said was like there needs to be a new poem in the manuscript. So I was thinking about the street I grew up on, which is called Boardman Road, and which is like very, like there were hills, there were curves around this road, and I was also thinking about the opening scene of The Shining, following that family as they drive up to the Overlook Hotel. So here it is. Borgman. Also that scene is scored by Wendy Carlos, who is the first trans woman to win a Grammy. Just a fun fact. So Borgman. After a lifetime away, I returned to the taut strings of the Midwest. Its white sheds bruise with evening, each tooth in a dog's mouth pulling a long note from a carcass. Thank you. Now we're just gonna stare at each other.
This has been such a joy. Thank you for having us on. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being.
Yeah.
Yes. I wanted to say, I think our closing remarks really are just to follow these folks and buy books, and of course sign up for our newsletter. Really, we just use it to notify folks of our upcoming events. We'll have an upcoming event in November to honor a poet, Sarah Maureen Rapana, who tragically passed, I think a week before her first book was published. It won the Juniper Prize. And so we're kind of doing a memorial / reading of her work and celebration. And she was an amazing poet. So please join our newsletter and you'll get notified of that and other classes and things. And I want to invite everyone to unmute and thank, and feel free to shout out and clap and applaud and thank Marcus and Rivka for spending time with us tonight.
Thank you.
Yay! And like Lisa said, we will be posting this video up on YouTube, not right away, but soon enough. So thank you once again, and good night.
Thanks.
Thanks again. Thanks for coming, everyone.